it's.
I don't know if it's before us. Oh, I think it's before.
You guys ready?
Yes.
Okay, I will call the regular city commission meeting to order for Wednesday, March 6th, 2019 at 7 p.m. Call roll, please.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Rachel Lyle Smith. Here. Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
Here.
Mayor Dan Holliday.
Here. So, following this meeting, we will have an executive session pursuant to ORS 192.6602E to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to negotiate real property transactions. We don't anticipate that we will come back into regular session to make any other decisions about that executive session. If you'll please stand and join me in the flag salute. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, under ceremonies and proclamations, we have 19-168 proposed regulatory signage and prohibition of on-street parking for Creed Street and Promontory Avenue. Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. So if you remember, January 16th, we had a regular city commission meeting that the neighborhood showed up for and talked a fair amount about frustrations with vandalism, loitering, just problem behavior on the Creed Street overlook. And so out of that came some direction that we should sit down with the neighborhood and meet with them, and Commissioner O'Donnell joined us, and we had a good meeting with the neighborhood, and we talked about some of the ideas we had, and they shared some of the ideas that they had, and we came to the conclusion, evidently, that's not gonna come up. It will.
Being finicky.
So I had some pictures of some of the pictures that the neighbors took. So it was mostly some of the graffiti that was on the pavement and on the wall, seating wall that folks have come to know in the Creed Street area. So really, we're just kind of back to give you an update. Our plan is to, that's an important feature that people enjoy, but at the same time, there's just been so much problem behavior up there that we're proceeding with prohibiting parking on Creed Street. We're doing that by the installation of several bollards, and they'll be removable bollards, but they'll essentially, the areas that people tend to pull up to, the seating wall there, or it's not really a seating wall, the barrier wall there, and they won't be allowed to park there anymore, and we'll be posting it all no parking. So
I thought we were gonna have a discussion of this at the city commission level prior to implementation.
Well, I guess we haven't done anything yet. So I'm not sure that it's necessarily been implemented. We're here to give you that update. And if we're assuming that was going to be something that was going to be, that the city commission would support. And so, but we haven't installed anything yet.
Okay.
So this isn't working quite right, but just go through this. I just want to show the last slide, maybe. There you go. You're doing a good job there for me, Phil. Thank you. So these are just,
Is that the last slide?
no. One more. There we go. So really a very simple drawing depicting, I can't remember, 14 bollards or so. Across kind of the dead end of Creed Street there, or the end of Creed Street. So residents will still be able to get in on Promontory Avenue, but the parking area along the wall there won't be available for folks to park at. And then our thought was we would put this in place. Those bollards would be removable so that they could be removed at some point in the future if we feel like if we get some time and maybe see the problem go away, because we definitely know that this problem comes and goes over the years, always has, and it's just really kind of peaked. So try to deal with that in a way that could be permanent, but hopefully we could remove those after several months and go back to the way it has operated in the past. And then if we see problems again, we can drop the bollards right back in place.
So what's to stop people from parking in that
That little,
right-hand triangle there between?
It'll all be posted no parking, so, enforcement's still gonna be required in that area. And really, we kind of wanted that area for fire and emergency
Turn
vehicles,
around.
garbage trucks to be able to pull in there and turn around, so.
Okay.
We just kind of, picked a straight line. We may arc that just a little bit, but that's generally the intent.
John, did you want to talk about the handicap?
yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah,
Is it wide enough?
we did have a concern about handicap parking and whether we actually designate it or just, we'd have to allow that kind of parking to happen. And if we did, we'd probably put it in that corner as well.
Okay. Commissioner Smith, you have something?
The bollards then would be wide enough for that as well, right?
Oh, they'd be able to get between the bollards
It'd be,
with,
yeah.
yeah, wheelchair access.
Any other questions?
Just a comment, as one who attended the meeting and listened to the concerns of the people, I felt it was a public safety event. And I thought time was of the essence. I thought it was important. And I understand the commission needs to hear these things, but I thought a timely response was important. And it's before us tonight, and I certainly feel we should move forward with post haste as rapidly as we can. It's the minimal response we could do in terms of escalation.
Commissioner Glassmith, you have something?
Yes, I just want to ask, so were there any other concerns raised by the neighborhood that were on the work group as far as the change in parking along the streets? I mean, or did the work group come to this conclusion thinking this was the best option, given other alternatives that you guys looked at?
For the most part, they were pretty supportive of this. They recognize that folks may choose to park along Barker, which won't be signed as no parking. Their real thought, though, is that the troublemakers, the folks that come and park and loiter and hang out near their cars, will probably not do that. They don't have, their thought was they probably wouldn't walk that far from their cars to just go loiter. They like to be near their cars. So the thought was those people who traditionally enjoy the area for the view and come and go, they would and could park on Barker and walk in.
It also removes the element of concealment for those who feel they can use their
Right.
cars to conduct illegal activities.
Right.
Commissioner Smith?
I guess the only thing would be, we're gonna watch this for, what, a year or so? And my only concern is we don't put a plan in effect to ever take those back out. Right, and we kind of see this as to deal with this problem, and then 10 years, 20 years from now, they're still there, and we really didn't, we've really closed off an important place to the public, so I just want to know if there's a plan at some point to readdress it and keep an eye on that, and then maybe bring it back to some public use at some point, I don't know.
Yeah, I think we're gonna stay in close communication with these property owners and we didn't set a specific date
Right.
but for me, the plan is, one of the big reservations for doing this is knowing how important that particular place is, right? So, and there are users who use it and use it appropriately. They come there and they have lunch and they view it and then they leave. But, so it'd be nice not to have this prohibited for very long, but we do need to kind of, I think, make the statement, make it well-known, again, hoping the troublemakers go away. New troublemakers will show up and, well, we may have to, install the bollards, but I think having them removable is the right way to go.
Okay. Anybody else?
No.
So is there any objection to Public Works moving forward with this plan?
No.
Okay, so you guys have direction.
Thank you.
All right, then we're moving on to citizen comment.
Did you fill one out?
For the mayor.
Citizens are allowed up to 3 minutes to present information relevant to the city, but not listed as an item on the agenda. Prior to speaking, should have completed a form and given it to the city recorder. place, probably.
William Gifford.
That's it?
Yeah.
Mr. Gifford?
Mr. Mayor, City Commissioners, my name is William Gifford, and I live in Oregon City. And actually, this is on the agenda. This was the last thing that you just talked about, but I didn't get a chance to make a comment about the bollard. Sounds like a really nice idea, the fact that it's temporary, I like that. I am concerned about two things. One is the turning radius for emergency vehicles to be able to get a fire
he
truck
mentioned
in and around that corner. I would want to make sure that we had enough clearance, not just to back up and do a three-point turnaround, but they ought to, I would think, be able to turn around in there. Second thing is, I didn't hear anything at all about the cost, and I'm,
It's in the report, is it not?
Yeah, it's
I
in,
didn't read
it's
the
in the
report,
commission
so-
report. So two things, we checked with, fire and our solid waste hauler, and we're good on that front. And then the cost, we're estimating, we're doing that in-house, so it's about $15,000 to install all of those bollards. And the signage.
Are the bollards gonna be just far enough to stop a car from coming through, or are they gonna be really close together?
6 feet centers.
6 feet? Okay.
So yeah, car can't get through there, but pedestrians, wheelchairs,
Okay, thank you.
gentlemen with their dogs.
Yes.
Is one of the little smart cars 6 feet wide?
Maybe.
We're hoping nobody up there that's causing trouble is actually driving a smart car. They don't seem too smart to me.
I think it's important to emphasize, it's not a standalone solution. There's still gonna be enforcement, and
That's
there
true.
may be retribution or a reaction by the affected personnel up there. I suspect the police department will still be on hand to deal with that. So it's not like we're gonna do this and walk away. It's an ongoing monitoring process, measured response, and we can escalate if needed.
Okay, so I'm making a change to the agenda. I'm going to move 7F to the start of the meeting. So at this point in time, is everybody okay with the agenda? Seeing no
Yeah.
objections, then we will move on to item 7F, which is 119-172, deliberation and appointment for city commission position number 2. Ms. Riggs?
I apologize, Mayor and Commission, I didn't really prepare much tonight. I just wanted to give you this opportunity to deliberate on the candidates that you had before you interview both yesterday, March 5th, and then today, March 6th. We have a total of 9 candidates, and it's up to you folks to decide which is the lucky winner for our commission position number 2.
And what is the typical process that we've used in the past?
Sure, so the process we've used in the past is I've handed out little slips of paper. You add your name to the top of the paper and you put down your first and second choice. And then I collect all of those slips of paper. I review them, and if all of you have the same number 1 choice, then that would be the winner. If all of you have the same number 2 choice, then that would be the winner. If all of you have any combination of the 2 that gives at least 3 votes, that would be the winner. And then after that, I would leave it up to you to say there's no winner.
Okay, discussion?
Do we need a just majority vote on
Yes.
the line
Yes.
number 1 versus 2 versus, you said all 4 of us have to be in agreement.
No, I'm sorry, just 3 out of the 4.
There's 3 of us have to be in
Yes.
agreement. Okay.
Very often in this process, we've all come down with the same number 1 choice, so. Not saying that's gonna happen tonight. Any other discussion?
My problem, I guess, with the process that we've always used in the past is that we do this writing names on pieces of paper and pass it back with really no conversation. Which really doesn't give the public any clue of why we put those names down. And I feel that that is something that should be known to the public, in terms of why we selected certain people, or why we felt that certain people were, the most qualified. I would like to see us be able to at least have a small conversation about that or communicate that in some way.
I'd agree with that. I'm a little bit concerned about the process, as described, if I understood it correctly. Say we went 2-2 on the candidate number 1 and 3-1 on candidate number 2. you're telling me the compromise candidate would be immediately placed in position at 3-1 in the second position.
That's
If we
correct.
followed that process, but we don't have to follow that process.
I would actually rather have a discussion, and it has to be conducted in public, but it's a discussion as to, I'm prepared when I vote to give my assessment of why I did. And I think if we need to have that discussion, if we say we end up at a 2-2 tie, and I don't know what it's gonna be, but just say we did. I just don't see defaulting to the second choice compromise candidate just immediately. I think we should have a discussion on those candidates. I'm not in favor of the process as you described it.
So should we just write our top candidate and see where we land and then
Sure, I guess we could start
open
with
it up
that.
for discussion?
That's one way to see if we have a resolution or not. If we don't, then we can move on.
I don't know if there was I mean,
Oh.
you guys,
Sorry.
Commissioner Smith,
Well, let's make sure we have.
right, I guess I'd, I'm hearing, I don't know that we've got direction right now. I think we've got some ideas. I think you guys can create this
Yeah.
however you want to do this. Whether it's deliberate, somebody makes a motion for one person, it gets seconded, and you vote, or if you want to do it through the blind draw first, put down your number one choice, see where we shake out. Talk about it first, then make a vote for your first choice. You have a lot of latitude here on how you go through this process.
The
So whatever.
difficulty for me is that, typically when you're making a hiring decision, you have the opportunity to have frank discussions about the candidates without it being A, in public, and B, without them being present, so you don't hurt anybody's feelings. So to have a frank discussion about the different candidates or maybe the top 3 or 4 candidates, becomes problematic for me. Just because, we had an opportunity to hear from all 9 of the candidates. Rachel's probably at the most, disadvantaged because, or maybe it's an advantage, I don't know, but, you only lived here a couple of years, and so you don't have the same familiarity with the candidates that maybe some of the rest of us have. I'm happy to go along with however the commission wishes to go about this. I think maybe we take a first shot at a first ballot and see what happens.
Single candidate,
Yes.
I'm fine with that. The process is what it is. It's mandated that it be a public process. I don't think we need to discuss any, but if we get into a discussion about candidates, it's gonna have to be
Right.
what it is. And when you run for election, as those of us up here have,
Yeah.
It's a
but
3 to
you
4
open
month-
yourself up to that.
meat grinder, so your exposure is limited.
We do have a winner. It's Denise McGriff.
Very good. Thank you.
So do you mind if we do a vote for confirmation on that? Or did you want to have discussion further about why you chose this candidate over any other candidate?
I wouldn't mind.
I wouldn't mind. I think it's important to the public to understand our thought processes in making those selections.
Well, I'll start off. Great candidates. So we had, I think with the exception of one, I know all these people, or have met all these people before. And typically, I don't know how many times I've been through this process, several times between urban renewal and city commission filling positions. And typically, the mayor's right. It usually comes pretty much down to the person, just by talking to them, just by going through that process. And I'm glad to see that's actually how it happened tonight. When you get to know people and talk to them, and we had some amazing candidates tonight. I think that, for me, what set Denise out was just a full knowledge of the city, questions that were asked in depth that she could respond to, in greater depth than really anyone else. And I feel like a real personal passion for it. A concern about the city, like real heartfelt concern about the city. And I think well-spoken, extremely well-spoken, and someone who has dedicated a huge amount of their time, which several of the people on this list did. But I think that, or did and have. And I just feel that, I feel she's the right one. In where we are going as a city. I'll tell you what, I was happy by so many of these. And really the reasons, the things that I was looking for in a commissioner are someone, like I said, who's well-spoken, is in the community. Denise spoke about going to the grocery store and constantly being, talked to by people. As a school teacher, I mean, I go to the grocery store. Sometimes I don't go to the grocery store just because I know that's going to happen. I mean, you get caught up in the community where you don't go out, where it doesn't take you 2 hours to get home. Most of my family and my sister especially won't go anywhere shopping with me anymore. And maybe there's other reasons for that. But that is a huge commitment. It's a personal commitment. It's a commitment to constantly being on and constantly being criticized and looked at, and that takes a real strong person. And I just want to say that so many of these people on this list. And I'm trying to think of anyone that didn't. So many people that were so concerned about the things that were actually major focuses of the last election. Livability, historic preservation, the uniqueness of this town, and we talked a lot about growth. Every one of these candidates talked about growth, talked about the balance of growth and what Oregon City's place is in that, but also balancing that with the unique historic character of this town. And I will say that in more than any time I've ever seen, this is the most crucial time to have people that get it. People that get this town, people that understand its unique history, people that know the process, people that know the staff, people that know every little detail about this city. And Denise does. I also want to say that if this is our final decision tonight, I'm happy to say that I'm probably now sitting on the most diverse city commission that this city has had in its entire history. And I'm proud of that.
Commissioner O'Donnell, you have something?
I'll add to it. The choice was difficult. I think we had so many good candidates, and I'm not here to patronize you with that statement. I'm here to tell you that some of you folks did incredibly well. Some operated at a disadvantage because you had 15 to 20 minutes to tell us who you were. Some we've had the ability to view over a period of years as to your thought processes and your inputs and how you handle yourself with the general public. And, when I made my decision, it was based on a combination of the strength of the resume, including education and experience, the knowledge base, and Denise brings some land use planning issues with her, knowledge and urban renewal and economic growth. In the interview, she was incredibly well-spoken. I mean, you can lose this in the interview, and she was incredibly well-spoken. In addition to that, I, as one who observes and values highly the input of the planning commission, I have watched many a meeting, and I think it's important for a public official to be welcoming and include diverse and sometimes opposing opinions, and that is what I have seen in those public meetings. So her understanding of the city process is important, something that I did not have when I came to this. And her ability to communicate, obviously, is superlative. So I stand by my choice for those reasons.
Mr. Smith, you have anything?
I won't be nearly as winded as my counterparts.
I wouldn't expect you would be able to.
I don't have that much. I will agree. I think we had a really great field of applicants, and I thought about this countless hours trying to, I thought about it, laying in bed at night last night. I thought about it this morning, trying to figure out who did I think could work with us and bring a lot to the table, bring something that was different than each one of us that's already up here. I thought that was I was looking for something so that we did have a diverse representation. I do want to say that I don't do politics, and I didn't make any decisions based off anybody coming up to me and saying, you should vote for this person, or you should vote for this person, you should vote for this person. I don't do that. I don't like that. And in fact, it's quite a turnoff to me. I just want folks to know that I think Denise is a really great asset to our community. And for the folks that didn't make it, there will be an election in 2 years. And so I would encourage you, particularly the women. There were a couple of other women among the field of majority men. So I was happy to see several women who came out and putting their name in the hat to get involved. And I would encourage you to continue to do that and stay active if you want to continue to do this. And for those other folks who didn't get selected as well, a lot of these candidates are already serving on commissions and committees in the city, and we value their input. We need them, and so I hope that this doesn't diminish your fervor for the committees and commissions that you're currently working on, whether it's serving in your neighborhood association, on the CIC, or the Planning Commission. Because we really do appreciate all that you give, and it has not gone unnoticed, because I do know that we all deliberated quite a bit over all of the candidates and who to pick, because we had really great candidates. So I would encourage you to run for office and actually campaign in a couple of years, and I think I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so we'll move on to public hearings. PC 19-019, Development Code Amendments, including equitable housing. Ms. Turway.
Thank you very much. We are here tonight to review some package of code amendments. In general, a lot of the amendments have to deal with removing and reducing barriers to housing and streamlining those associated processes. As you recall, we broke up this package of code amendments into 4 segments, and this is session number 3. And so we identified particular topics to be discussed at each of the meetings. The record is open. The public is able to speak about whatever topic they want. We are just picking a couple of code chapters, which we advertised, and then giving you a high-level summary of some of the proposed amendments. We also identified the more controversial ones before the Planning Commission, and then a couple of questions that came up after Planning Commission review, so we'll talk to you about that as well. After this process, how the commission has decided to move forward is we assume everything in the package is fine unless you call it out specifically. If you call it out specifically, we will put it on the agenda for April 3rd. And then on April 3rd, we'll go through that list of items, and then you guys will give us some direction on each of those, and we will either amend our draft code or not, and then we'll come back the next time with the final amendments. So with that, we have Pete Walter, our planner, to help you.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm going to advance this slide. So we've had a number of meetings that were held during the Equitable Housing Project, as well as the other code amendment meetings. This is an overview of where we've been and where we're going, as Laura described. Tonight, we are reviewing a variety of additional standards. Oh, sorry. Thanks. We're reviewing a variety of additional standards that are listed here. I'm going to go through these one by one. On March 20th, we'll be reviewing procedural improvements such as administrative processes and site plan and design review. We'll also be talking about lot averaging at the March 20th meeting, so not tonight. Please refer to your packet for the detailed amendments. We put together a table, a tabular summary of the larger topics of debate, and we'll be talking about that briefly tonight. The first item was recommendation for allowance for parking lots that are not used in conjunction with a primary business to be used after hours for general public, and parking in the mixed-use corridor, Willamette Falls downtown district, and the mixed-use downtown zones. This has a lot of support. We haven't heard any controversy about this.
Hey, wait,
Hold on, back up.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I thought I saw somewhere in here that it required permission of the private owner. Is that true?
That would be correct, yes.
Okay, so it's not just that it doesn't make
You
it
can just
automatically open.
Carte blanche park there, yeah, you would,
Okay.
yeah, right, but it would,
So are you saying that right now, say, the lot, kitty corner from, Dutch Brothers downtown, if the owners allowed it, it would be somehow illegal to park after hours?
It would have to be in conjunction with the daytime principal land use on that parcel or within 1,000 feet of that parcel, which is a complicated part of the code that we just wanted to remove. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, now that makes sense.
I'm going to comment on this. As one who likes to patronize the downtown businesses and who has struggled finding parking, only to come up top here and use the elevator to get down. I understand the city's involvement. What I don't understand is why the business community cannot work together to put together a resolution of their own. When you're down there and you're trying to find a parking place and you live in fear that if you park in this parking lot, you may incur a $400 tow bill, that cannot possibly be good for their joint business. So I understand the city's involvement in mediating this thing. I'd like to see some effort on behalf of that community and to try to work together to their mutual benefit.
So does the city have a role in keeping up with who's allowing, or is it just a matter of they put up tow signs?
The city's role is to allow these properties to be used after hours by the general public. So example, if your shop is closed at 5, the general public could park there. Also, through the Transportation Demand Management Plan that was approved by the commission, which looks at ways to get in and around downtown and the Legacy site. One of the items on that list is to develop a shared parking, so we could do a parking system where if you go to downtown Portland, everybody knows what a smart park is and that you can park there. If we wanted to internally in Oregon City develop something like that, if the city wanted to partake in that or as a part of the TDM plan, we could.
In simplest terms, there's no signage on some of these lots that indicates you can park after 5.
And you're not allowed to by zoning either. It's not open for public parking unless you have a conditional use, and this removes that barrier.
So what do we do to resolve this? Is an ongoing, never solved thing. What's our next step?
Once you,
Maybe we shouldn't go into it tonight, but I mean, it's a frustrating thing to me, so we can park it if you want and come back to it.
Just take care of it now.
should the commission want to approve the proposed amendment, then a shop owner could use their site for public parking after hours without city approval. Now it requires planning commission approval through a conditional use permit.
Could the private party charge for parking?
Yes, this doesn't distinguish if it's charged or free.
Okay.
So with proper signage, we could identify that between these hours, there's a charge for parking and you do this. And after these hours, you park at no expense without fear of predatory towing.
And we've worked with the Downtown Oregon City Association. They've identified 3 potential property owners who are willing to try this on a trial basis. There's some things that we have to work out. One is dealing with the zoning issues. There's some discussion about pay versus no pay. As part of that transportation demand management plan that was done, part of this was how do you brand your parking? When you see a smart park, you know what it is. When you go to McMinnville, you know where your free parking is. So that's another thing that we're trying to work on in coordination. So those are the things that we can bring. How do we open up even our city hall parking lot after hours to get you to the elevators or the grand staircase to go downtown? So everything that we can do to try to alleviate that congestion that we see during those peak demand hours.
Well, there's no question, we all agree that our job is to facilitate a solution, so whatever that takes.
Was there any consideration to include the commercial district, the general commercial district in this?
The direction from the planning commission was just to look at these 3 zones. As far as general commercial, we don't hear a lot of the same kind of problems in the general commercial zone, generally because I think the parking lots are bigger and there's more spread out land uses in that zone. But, yeah. Off-street parking for non-residential zones, what we're proposing to discuss on April 3rd will address off-street parking for the residential zones. So what we're doing with the parking code is clarifying both the parking standards for bicycles, clarifying and reorganizing some of the landscaping standards. We're exempting parking lots that are small from certain interior landscaping and building buffer landscaping requirements because they're very hard to fit in those small lots. There is a requirement that we would increase the ratio of the trees versus the shrubs on interior parking so that we can get shading in the interior parking lots. And we've added some standards for a proposal for alternative landscaping plans, which we already have in the code, but it's just clarifying some of those existing things. Example is where we mandate certain stormwater planters and rain gardens and things like that. And those kinds of things are encouraged through an alternative landscaping plan. And so we have 2 tracks in the code for that now, and this just clarifies those standards. The street design code, which is the standards that govern the public right-of-way, what's going on here is we separated this into 2 chapters. One chapter deals with development standards for review of new development, and the other deals with ongoing maintenance obligations. Just to clarify those, they were previously lumped together, and it was made for fairly long, lengthy staff reports, and where a lot of that stuff was not applicable for development review. We're clarifying a lot of redundant language, removing that. We have maximum block length specified for most development, but removing that maximum block length in certain industrial and employment districts makes sense because it's principally a residential district standard. And let's see, we have some driveway standards that are being clarified to allow more than one driveway on a major street in certain cases, as approved by the city engineer. Fire access widths for access ways and landscaping on those will be clarified. We have made some updated cross-references to our newest transportation system plan. And we are exempting certain things such as minor commercial alterations. Accessory dwelling units, garages, sheds, and porches would no longer be part of the calculation when you're doing a residential addition and that sort of thing. Currently, you have to do a street improvement if you are adding more than 50% to the square footage of your house, but it did not specify that non-habitable space was not part of that calculation. So for fairness, it makes sense to remove that. We're going to be discussing the alleys further tonight. And we've clarified certain standards for violations, performance guarantees, warranties, and penalties.
So,
I gotta-
wait,
Hang on, 1 second. I gotta ask you
a lot
one
of
question,
stuff.
okay? So you're telling me that alleys have been a requirement citywide for how long?
1998, alleys were a requirement in the code for industrial and commercial districts. In 2008, that was clarified to apply to neighborhood commercial, mixed-use areas, and high-density residential areas citywide. And then with the current proposal, we're talking about keeping those zones, the requirement for those zones, but only applying it in the concept plan areas.
Where have we built a residential subdivision with alleys?
High school.
There's a few. South of the high school, in the R2 zone, in the area between Thayer Road and Maple Lane Road. We have some planned unit developments that have alleys.
Yeah.
So there's probably about 5 or 6 subdivisions of various zones that have used them. And we'll talk about that some
Okay.
more. Yeah.
so, you said about the street improvements. You were wanting to exempt non-habitable areas, but you're including ADUs on here.
Correct. This is part of the Equitable Housing Project recommendation. You know, we want to encourage accessory dwellings. So we're specifically, as we went through the Planning Commission review, this was a clear decision that they supported, was to exempt accessory dwelling units from a requirement to build upgrade the front of the street and add a sidewalk, because it's a significant expense. I don't know what the costs are, but it can be from $10,000 to $30,000 to put a sidewalk in that meets city standards on a residential property. And that could be triggered in some cases by just adding an accessory dwelling, which is probably not going to be something that encourages that type of housing unit.
And just to clarify, the provision in the code puts a limit on how much street improvements can happen with a new home or an addition. It limits it to 10% of the valuation of the addition. So there's a limit.
I see a difference between an uninhabitable or uninhabited garage, shed, or porches versus an ADU with inhabitants that could place additional demand on the street improvements. So grouping them together maybe can be the subject of discussion.
Sure.
Is there a list of the street improvements? Like, you mentioned sidewalks, are there other things that,
Street trees, making sure the driveways are meeting city driveway standards. The underlying pipes and things that are going under the sidewalks may have to be meeting public works standards. So it also requires dedication. So if the street isn't currently meeting our minimum width for a right-of-way, we will first require that dedication so that the improvement can be built to the current standard.
Okay, moving on.
Okay. Public and street trees, we're basically, with this section of code, codifying existing policies that we have been using for a long time in response to requirements for tree removal. As you may know, we have had lots of problems with trees lifting sidewalks throughout the city, and as a consequence of that, we have developed some more flexible criteria that we've been using for the last few years, including allowing, in addition to adopting a new street tree list, allowing for replacement of street trees in someone's yard, if they wish that, or paying fee in lieu of planting. What we didn't do when we did that is prioritize planting over payment of fee in lieu, and subsequently, with this code amendment, if there's sufficient space to plant a tree that is recommended for a certain width of planter, then this amendment would prioritize that first over then paying fee in lieu, with the intent to actually maintain street trees in the right-of-way. Some other provisions are requiring the installation of root barriers, specifying that maintenance includes watering throughout the summer, because oftentimes trees will die during the summer if they're not watered. And then codifying the one-to-one replacement policy, allowing nuisance or invasive trees to be removed without replacement, and cross-referencing our natural resource overlay district for the species that are required to be planted within that district.
And one quick note is, you see American with Disabilities Act or the ADA identified in orange on the screen, and that's because, I realized in our code, we want to make sure that we identified an error in the current code before you right now, from the November 26th version. And I want to make sure that we change that to just reference ADA mobility. So essentially the problem is if your sidewalk's lifted too much, then it's caused by a tree nearby. You got to replace the tree. This code provision is codifying policy that we have that says it's a one-for-one replacement. You don't get dinged for multiple tree replacement. Right now, it has a specific number of inches that the sidewalk's raised. I want to replace it to just reference the ADA requirements rather than have a number. So that will be a change from the November 26th version.
Our tree code for development on private property be renamed. We're clarifying some of the replacement options, not making a whole lot of changes to the number of trees that are required based on the diameter of a tree that's removed. It's still a code that allows for removal, depending on the construction situation. The amendment would allow us to not have to require an arborist report to make a determination on a dead or invasive species. And that would simplify things greatly. And the Natural Resources Committee recommended that we add that Oregon white oaks, if removed, be replaced with the same species because they are at the northern extent of their range in the Willamette Valley in Oregon City and are considered fairly uncommon, or not rare, but definitely uncommon here.
So this is just for new construction, right?
This relates to development, redevelopment on private property, whether it's a subdivision or commercial property. It is also applied when you are doing an addition to an existing commercial development as well. So,
But as far as residential is concerned, it doesn't have anything to do with, if you've owned your house for 5 years, you
Right.
don't like the tree.
this does not apply to that.
Okay.
Yeah. The Natural Resource Overlay District protects streams and wetland habitat throughout the city through a vegetative corridor. There's a list of documents in that code that it refers to as a resources document. We're adding the South End Concept Plan to that list of identifying documents. We are including a passage that encourages applicants, whether they're in the Natural Resource Overlay District or not, to contact the Natural Resources Committee and talk about development and seek advice. That's non-binding on the Natural Resources Committee and the applicant, and doesn't relieve them from any obligation to comply with the code requirements. It's just an opportunity for communication and advisement with our Natural Resources Committee. We're adding additional references to the Oregon City plant lists or locally adopted plant lists, such as the Portland Metro plant list and other lists, which are much more up to date than our current plant list and have a much more comprehensive overview of species types, including invasive species. We wanted to specify that we were going to require mitigation to be as close to the disturbance area as possible. That's something that's been unclear in the code. As far as existing structures in the Natural Resource Overlay District, additions to those under the new code would be treated similarly to new structures. So it would be a clearer mitigation approach for those kinds of things. We're removing the option for a natural resource overlay district tract to be owned by the owner of another lot in the subdivision. They could still be owned by an HOA or public ownership or public maintenance or homeowners association.
And what's the point of that?
Point of that is because when you have private ownership of a natural resource overlay district tract, it has resulted in maintenance difficulties and it may interfere with the subdivisions that have been platted already. You want to speak to that?
Yeah,
Or-
and it may put an undue burden on one person for a subdivision as a whole
Yeah.
to maintain when the benefits of the natural resource overlay district are more broader.
Yeah.
So if you put the maintenance responsibilities on a homeowners association or a public entity, sometimes there's other things in the tract, so the city retains ownership, then there's more assurance that it will be adequately maintained and doesn't get subsequently accidentally bought or
Okay.
sold or something.
And
How is that enforced? If the HOA lets something go deteriorate?
Code enforcement, if they, for natural.
Complaint-based or observed?
For natural resource overlay district, when you do some original plantings, you have to give a 5-year bond for survival rate of those plantings at 80%. There's also easements and those sorts of things that happen beyond that time. So after 5 years, they want their money back, so we go back and check. And then beyond that, there's just code enforcement. If someone built something they weren't supposed to, or cut a tree they weren't supposed to, or something like that.
Is that enforcement complaint-based or observed by code enforcement?
Mainly complaint-based,
Okay.
sometimes observed, but mainly complaint.
And we'll be talking about the new standards for fences that are in the buffer zone, as well as we're clarifying the allowance for hazardous and dead tree removal requirements. So we're moving on to the top planning commission discussion items. These include shelters, mobile food carts, tree removal in the annexation areas, and the allowance of fences in natural resource overlay district. And during the city commission's review, the items have come up, including street trees and number of street trees and general tree mitigation trees required. We just wanted to get some clarification from the city commission on what those concerns are. And we can come back and talk about those on April 3rd. And then we'll be talking about alleys and the concept plan areas. So the first item is the shelters, and the planning commission has recommended that shelters be a conditional use for up to 10 beds in all residential zones. And in the mixed-use corridor and mixed-use downtown zone, it would be a conditional use, except within the downtown design district where it be prohibited, and it would be prohibited everywhere else. There have been a number of public comments related to specific tax lots that have been permitted to be used as shelters through resolution of the city commission. And that's a discussion we would probably want to have. And there, along with the shelters, we included a series of standards that relate to shelters specifically in the conditional use section. And that includes a requirement that there be a public meeting before the facility opens, that there be 24-hour notice and a point of contact. And there are, the advantage of having a conditional use process for shelters is that they are unique land uses. And the conditional use processes allows the public to comment and the planning commission to apply conditions of approval that are specific or tailored to the individual application.
Questions?
So, Mr. Walter, I was reading the existing code. How does this proposal differ from what we have in effect other than the residential? Is the residential the only difference between existing state of affairs in the future?
Shelters are not listed as a use at all in our code. right now. So the allowance for shelters has been through emergency resolution to suspend the zoning code when temperatures are extreme. And that's not the best way to deal with a land use that is providing such a service in the community that it is very important. And this was discussed by the Equitable Housing Project Advisory Team, and they did make a recommendation on this item. Anything else you want to add to that?
There's lots of opinions weighed in on this one. They're all in this sheet here. I think the largest discussion was, should they be permitted, prohibited, or conditional? Just to clarify, conditional requires a approval process. It goes with the staff recommendation to the planning commission, who ultimately makes a decision based on criteria. We added some conditional use criteria for that too. It comes with a fee, so that was a part of the discussion as well. Is the conditional use process onerous or not? Should it be permitted? If it is permitted outright, then there is no public comment part of that. So those are some of the things that we heard are the pros and cons of allowing things outright or going through a process, which is fees and public input.
And I suspect the most sensitive discussion is about residential zones. Because we already do the others under emergency basis, do we not?
You have done it for the last few years. Most of this discussion was actually about MUC and MUD and the commercial ones, less on the residential side. There has been some discussion in this scenario. There's this residential cap of 10 that has been an item of some discussion. But you can prohibit them everywhere, you can allow them outright everywhere, and anything in between.
So if we were to move forward with this proposal, it doesn't remove the city from having to do emergency temporary orders for the ones that the Homeless Solutions Coalition, they're specifically calling out specific tax lots of properties that we're allowing to be shelters, right? This doesn't solve that, right?
It provides an avenue for them to move forward without that process. It says that there's a conditional use that's required. They can go through that conditional use, and should the planning commission grant it, then they don't have to go through that process ever again. So above all, we at least want to figure out what to do with these and identify a process or prohibit them if we don't want to process.
And can you point me to, I should rephrase that, to where is the definition of a shelter?
1704-1117. Would you like us to read it?
Yes, please.
Sure.
One second. And there was a lot of discussion on shelter and calling it temporary shelter or not. In this case, shelter means a congregate facility designed to provide housing to shelter families and individuals offered on a short-term basis. Shelters may offer meals, lodging, and associated services on site aimed at helping people move towards self-sufficiency. Shelters may include day shelters, cooling or warming shelters, and other similar shelters. Shelters are not considered bed and breakfast inns / boarding houses, hotels, or motels, which have a separate definition.
I remember this discussion coming up before, and then the second question is, what's the definition of short-term?
There was discussion on that. At one point, there was numbers in there, and we heard, the planning commission heard a lot of testimony on not doing numbers, because particularly if you're doing a conditional use, you can put more bookends on it if you need to. But it's hard to regulate if you've been here 31 days and you're only supposed to be there 30 days. How does the city go about regulating which person has been in which shelter too long if the shelter's open every day of the year? So that's where the definition was changed to be, the purpose of the use is to be temporary in purpose and to help people move on in purpose. So what are the services that the shelter is providing, and are the services the shelter is providing helping people towards self-sufficiency?
I don't know how you monitor that either. That's why I think a finite number has value. I don't want it to turn into a long-term essentially a residence, but I understand, I remember Commissioner Ide about what does it take to get somebody progressed into self-sustenance. It's a discussion we can have. I don't need to have it this evening.
Yeah, I'm nervous on the regulatory side of that. How do I monitor and track?
Regardless of how you phrase it, it's gonna be a regulatory nightmare, with or without a numerical constraint.
The only thing that I would suggest to add to this would be that in the conditional use process for shelters, that it automatically comes to the city commission for review.
Oh, okay.
Then we might as well make it a type 4.
Oh, you always have the ability to pull things up as well as a commission?
I know, but I don't
Okay.
want, I don't want something like this to slip through the cracks through the planning commission. I think the planning commission should have their say, and then it automatically be reviewed by the city commission.
Okay, so in our next draft, I'm hearing a consensus from the commission. In our next draft, they will go to planning commission and then to city commission.
Okay?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, my concern is that, residents in a residential area wouldn't get the notice, wouldn't get the postcard, wouldn't, and then they would have a 10-person or 10-bed shelter pop up that they never knew about I mean, we already
then they're
have,
gonna
we already
come
have
after
that.
you.
They're gonna come after us after that. And I don't blame them because I'm not convinced that our communication process is all that swell on, letting folks know what's going on in their neighborhoods. And so that's my concern with the residential and relying solely on that process to get neighborhood input on residential shelters.
I agree with that statement 100%.
Okay,
Understood?
moving on.
Just to clarify, you're talking about residential shelters only going to city commission or all shelters?
I would say all shelters.
You looking for a consensus?
No, that was a great clarification.
We can bring it back.
Okay.
I mean,
we'll talk about it.
we can bring it back.
We'll come back
Bring
on
back.
April 3rd to talk.
I mean, I wouldn't anticipate that we're not gonna get 100 applications for these.
No.
So, I don't think it's gonna be that onerous for the city commission to review them. Moving on.
Now we're on to mobile food carts. Now, these are defined as transitory and non-transitory. And the reason for that is because we have food carts that would be permitted for up to 5 hours within a 24-hour period. And those would be allowed in the employment zones, which are the mixed-use employment, campus industrial, and general industrial zones. Permanent food carts would continue to only be allowed in the Willamette Falls downtown district. This also includes standards that have been written for public facilities and whether you are required to hook up to sewer and water, or whether you can be just a self-contained food cart. Planning Commission recommended approval of this, but did not discuss the current request from Clackamas Community College to include food carts on that property. The recommendation from Planning Commission was to allow transitory food carts in the employment zones in order to serve employees and customers. There were some aesthetic concerns about how food carts would look. And then we did hear about suggestions to allow it in the institutional district, but that could include publicly owned or city-owned property. So there's needs to be some discussion about that. And we have heard from support for the food cart idea from a lot of the public. We've also heard concerns in the past with respect to the impact on brick and mortar restaurants. We just wanted to note that as planning, we would not generally intervene in any competition between businesses that are otherwise allowed in that zone. That's the majority of the discussion points on that.
So to be clear,
Yeah.
because I want to be clear on this, the only place that a quote permanent food cart is currently allowed in our zoning is in the Willamette Falls downtown district, is that correct?
The only place any exterior food cart is allowed in the city at all today is the Willamette Falls, and that's how this started. This is less than a handful of things that really aren't related to housing. We wanted to set the parameters for what are the regulations or requirements on the Willamette Falls site, and then the Planning Commission broadened it to other sites as well. I did want to make one, there's one more correction that I want to make in this chapter too. We have two provisions, one for if you have a food cart that operates that is on site for less than 5 hours within a 24-hour period. And then we have provisions if you are on site for more than 5 hours within a 24-hour period as well, which is like more permanent hookup of facilities and things like that. We want to change it slightly to say 5 hours or less, because we have more than 5 hours and less than 5 hours. We can hit what to do exactly at 5 hours. So it's a slight word tweak that you will see in the code amendments coming back to you.
How did you arrive at 5 hours?
It's best practices for the industry. So it's across the nation, a lot of people use 5 hours because you can pull up to a site, start to prep your food, open, serve a meal, and close within 5 hours. So it's a common amount of time. And more than that, then our requirements say you have to hook up to city sewer, and you're more of a permanent facility, and less transitory is the word the Planning Commission used to describe it. So you either, stop in and making lunch, or moving on to a site, moving off real quick, or you want to be there for the long haul.
So the difference between permanent and temporary is virtually, the only difference is the amount of time that they're there.
Yes, but if you're there for more than 5 hours, then you will end up being a more permanent installation, because we want to make sure that you hook up and we clean all the oils out of your food system before it goes into the sewer, and you're hooked up into the sewer. If you're
Right,
not,
right.
then you're like a self-contained mobile thing. If you're more permanent, you are hooked into facilities
Okay.
a little bit more.
Go back.
Couple more. So currently, right now, it still states that they're not in the code that food carts aren't allowed, right?
Exterior food carts, yeah.
And then, this is, how are we operating in terms of, events? Right now, people are coming to the city asking for a special permit for that particular weekend or that particular day, right? I just wanna make sure I know what we're still doing right now.
Yeah, this exempts the special permit,
This
special
would,
events permit,
right.
which
So
is,
this would replace that,
So
but it would
like,
still be.
Coin Toss Brewing wouldn't have to buy a permit every time they had a food cart.
if you can get special events permits, and under the special events permits, you can have a food cart within your special event. So like festivals have food carts and
Right.
things like that. So this is not geared towards that.
You still
No,
have to
you're missing my point here. So
If they wanna
Yes,
do it.
currently, Coin Toss has to come down and get a special events permit every time they have their food truck Friday, right?
Ideally, yes.
Okay, and with this code change, they would no longer have to do that because they're inside one of those zones, right?
Correct.
Thank you, that's all I wanted to know.
And so I have a question. So, if a food cart wants to set up in a legally allowable zone that we establish, is it that they work out a deal with the property owner and for this location that they're going to go to? I mean, they're not given wholesale, opportunity to go and park in any parking lot, or can you talk a little bit more about what those regulations are?
We do not get involved in that piece, so ideally they work with the property owner. What we do get involved with is they'll have to submit an application to us showing us that they meet all the requirements, and we'll issue a permit for it.
So,
For them to be a mobile,
yeah,
that they can set up anywhere, anytime, as long as they have a deal with whatever property owner.
yeah. And so that they wouldn't displace parking that's necessary, for example, that
Right.
kind of thing, yeah.
I believe I know I was the only person on the city commission where we started issuing permits for food carts. And so we went through, there was a whole process, there was a whole bunch of restrictions and guidelines and all that. Have we completely thrown that out, or is that gonna be part of this as well? And you mentioned in terms of aesthetics, you know, if someone pulls in a trailer into, you know, a certain part, does it have a certain look? Does it have an expectation of what it's supposed to be? You know, whether it's a thing like in this bicycle picture or whether it's something else. And I remember that in the permit process that we had, those were all specified. And so are we gonna be using something similar to that, or is that gonna be becoming part of this or not?
I appreciate you remember. That bicycle picture is from that permit, or
Yeah.
from when we were dealing with, yeah, so, we worked as a community to identify if there are some regulations to allow food carts in public right of way, so it was really on the sidewalks
Right.
on Main Street. And, we came up with regulations and they were ultimately not adopted.
Right.
And we did look at those, but these are slightly different, you're right. There are provisions to say, you know, you have to screen your garbage enclosures and stuff like that, or your generator needs to be screened even for temporary, carts, but, we did reference them, but
Okay.
So this isn't what that conversation was, yeah.
No, and I mean, and maybe that conversation will come back at some point, I don't know.
Would you like for us to tell you about make a decision, or at least tell you what we'd like to see about the CCC campus? What zone is the CCC campus, and or were you thinking of proposing calling it out separate as Clackamas Community College, or?
It's an institutional zone.
Yes.
So it's a public zone. And I don't know that we've formulated a recommendation yet on this, so.
I'd prefer that we keep that discussion separate from the major code review.
There may be some testimony on that too, so.
there was testimony at the planning commission level. The planning commission went around about if they should add institutional, as an FYI. A lot of the properties that are zoned institutional are city properties, and then there's the college. Other properties can be zoned institutional, like schools and things like that, they're just not. So the planning commission did have a discussion about that zone, but it was really geared towards city property.
So in that case, it'd be up to the city to decide whether or not we wanted food carts on city property.
Yeah, and
I mean, I don't think that we would probably do
That's
that,
the
so then that
property
means
owner.
we're
Oh,
really
we
talking
have in
about
the
the
past.
community college.
So that is how, the college itself had, I can't remember if we had discussion at planning commission about the CCC, but
I don't,
we have now,
no, it came later.
yeah. So, it's up to the commission, whatever you choose to do.
Okay?
Next item was a discussion about the removal of trees in annexation areas. After a lot of discussion at planning commission level, and based on this actually happening, the decision was the recommendation is to add an additional factor in the annexation criteria that, with respect to consideration of the annexation in the event that there is significant site grading or tree removal that occurs since the date of application for the annexation. There are a number of concerns from the development community with respect to this, as to the language being too subjective, possibly conflicting with Clackamas County zoning and other policies. Some statements that it is unnecessary and unfair to landowners and does not promote equitable housing. On the public comment side, you know, there's a concern that large tree removal changes the character of the neighborhoods that are subsequently annexed to the city. And there's no opportunity for the city to weigh in on that because it's not within the city's jurisdiction. The planning commission strongly recommended that the city commission look at working with Clackamas County on the policy to address this. There are a handful of cities that have addressed this through policies with respect to, like Lake Oswego is one, and that's a non-binding resolution that the city of Lake Oswego uses to notify potential annexing parties that this is a concern of the city, and that if they do remove large trees or do significant site grading, they could delay their annexation for a period of time. And subsequently, we've been needing to mitigate for that by working with staff once they are annexed. So there's a number of administrative issues associated with implementing a policy like that. It does require that we look at it in further detail, and it's really something that we need to look a lot harder at in terms of its, who needs to be involved in this discussion and what the potential conflicts are. So.
I have a question, Ms. Richter. Does the city have any authority whatsoever to regulate that?
No.
Not until an annexation application is filed. I mean, and that's why we felt like making it a factor would be something that the city commission could consider during the annexation process, because until they file an application, we don't have any, until it's actually annexed, we don't have any regulatory jurisdiction.
But, and I was involved in the tree ordinance deal for Clackamas County several years ago. And part of the problem with that is, okay, you have this 5 acres of trees that is, going to be residential at some point in time, unless somebody buys it to preserve it that way. We put this in place, and so what the developer does, instead of leaving it there as long as they can before they, cut stuff down and build, they buy the property and they cut it all down right then, and then you've got 5 years of it sitting fallow before you build anything on it. So it's a catch-22 as far as that's concerned. I just don't think that we should be spending a lot of staff time and a lot of energy on something that we have no legal authority to do.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I think you just implied that we have some legal authority once an application is filed.
Well, I mean, the applicant is asking us for authorization to do something. And so at that point, we can't go stop them from cutting trees after an application is filed, but we can consider what they do between when an application is filed and when it's decided. Lake Oswego's policy is they're gonna look back 2 or 3 years. I can't remember exactly what the period is, but it's years. And they will look back as part of an annexation review. I mean, it's advisory. It's not regulatory, but it is advisory. So that's how they do it. And my understanding is that it has worked for them.
So my question is under the current state law, as long as the annexation applicant meets the requirements in state law, that we have to annex. Is that not the case?
If they meet our annexation criteria.
Okay.
And this would be one of the, and the annexation criteria, we have our factors that we consider, comprehensive plan policies and the like. And if we find that those are satisfied, then, and it's in the urban growth boundary and all the
Right.
circumstances are satisfied, then yes. But we're making this a factor, so you could consider it.
So the annexation, remember, it's on balance of the factors. I think right now there are 7, I think this would be 8.
Yeah.
Right? And so on balance, it's not you have to meet every one of them, it's not you have to meet 3/4 of them, it's on balance in your discretion as the commission, whether that annexation is approved or not.
So if the annexation were to be denied, is that an appealable event to LUBA?
It is.
Okay.
So if our concern was soil stability and runoff and erosion, would that be a valid, could we express that?
I'm not looking at the annexation factors, but I think that is,
So the factor specifically says whether significant site grading or tree removal greater than 50% of forest canopy, excluding farm or forest practices as defined in ORS, has occurred within the property since the date the annexation application was filed with the city. So the framework is just when you get the official application of the annexation application, have they cut more than 50% of the canopy? If so, you can consider that.
It just seems to me that all you're doing is encouraging people to deforest their property prior to the application of the annexation.
Well, how would, I mean, if a property owner wanted to cut all their trees, how would that not be part of their standard farm and forest practices? I mean, you said if it didn't abide by farm and forest practices, but, I mean, some of these annexations that I think we've looked at, they are zoned in the county so that they can do what would be considered forestry practices, and therefore, I'm not sure that this clause would even matter in
Well,
that
I think
circumstance.
that's part of the hard policy. We've run into a couple of these applications where, I mean, the properties have specifically been in timber deferment.
Right.
I mean, they were specifically planted to be harvested. And
Right.
so, I think that's just something to think about is what do you do in that situation? Because, we will run into it.
Well, and the other part of that is that the county still does not have a tree ordinance. So there's nothing preventing anybody who owns land in the county from logging that land completely at basically any time they choose.
And
Yeah, I think the flip part though is that in Lake Oswego, they go back and they make you look and you potentially start to mitigate for that loss of canopy. So I mean, there's a spectrum of options there to be
Well,
considered.
Lake Oswego has a much less active border than we have.
Understood.
They're pretty much landlocked at this point.
I understand engaging in mitigation. I mean, you can make a choice to clear cut it. And if such, you create another situation, soil stability or runoff. If the development needs retaining walls, I think that's a valid requirement.
Sure.
So I think it's a choice that the landowner, developer makes. I can do this or I can do this. And here's the potential repercussions of that.
A couple other points from staff's perspective was that we can't regulate in the county. And there could be a scenario where the property is annexed into the city and the trees that you have designated to be saved can be legally removed under current city code that governs development. And unless there's a change in code that treats the trees that you preserve during annexation differently than other trees in the city code.
Commissioner Smith, you have something?
Yeah.
Yeah, the last thing I would say is that, I think we need to think long and hard about property rights. And, the ability of a property owner to decide what they want to do with their property. They're deciding when they want to, when they apply to annex, they're deciding when they cut trees. And they have that right as a property owner and so I fully support trying to work with the county to try to work on this issue. I don't know that this is appropriate for, the code amendments at this time.
Okay, moving on.
So with respect to the alleys in concept plan areas, we've reached out to the neighborhoods, South End, and we have met with the Park Place Neighborhood Association, and we're going to be meeting with the South End Neighborhood Association on March 21st to talk about design standards as well as alleys. So the Planning Commission didn't express any concerns with this language, but we've heard that development community has some concerns, including that alleys don't work well on slope sites. They possibly reduce available yard area. They're harder to sell, the homes apparently, and various other things. And the concerns that staff had, or at least the benefits that staff thinks that alleys provide based on some of the concept planning that was done, is that in the higher density areas that will eventually be developed in the concept plan areas, these provide a more walkable streetscape. They provide more space for on-street parking and street trees. And for the higher density and mixed-use areas, it's a design standard that helps to alleviate the impact of garages on the street in high-density neighborhoods. So those are the pros and cons that we've discussed. And in addition to that, the Public Works Department has some comments on this as well. So you can decide.
one more of these code amendments, last one, that if you were to retain alleys within the city code, we'd want to do one little tweak to make sure that the private property owners maintain the alleys so that the city doesn't maintain that our existing code does not say that. So if you choose to retain alleys in the city, we would want to make sure that we clarify that.
Okay, so I have to ask this question now. We started this process for what reason?
Well, vast majority of these are to remove and reduce barriers to housing,
Right.
through our equitable housing project.
So the whole idea was to try to reduce regulations to make it less expensive to build houses so that we could get more people into housing. Generally speaking, that was the idea behind doing this whole code amendment thing, right? So when we look at especially these two concept plan areas and that, what we're actually doing is adding more regulation, adding more cost, making homes more expensive and harder to sell. That's all I'm gonna say at this point.
Well, let me share with you that Commissioner Rachel Lyle Smith and I attended the Park Place meeting. We surveyed the audience, and we realized that the concept plan is somewhat out of date and maybe should be reviewed because it has aged. We took a poll of the people present, and it was a significant turnout, I'd say 35. The city did a presentation, which I think lacked one essential element, which was they portrayed the Park Place concept plan and its requirements, but did not in the hand out what the citywide criteria were for comparison. And I invite you that when you do the South End Neighborhood Association, which I will attend, that you include that in your presentation. And when we polled the audience, we had a half a dozen that were absolutely, this is what we told you we wanted in the concept plan, and this is what we still want. And then we had another half dozen that said, you know, there's elements of this that maybe should be reviewed. Maybe the dual walkway can go away. Maybe the detached garage can go away. So there's those two spectrums. But the one thing they were unanimous on is they did not want to summarily adopt the citywide plan as it currently exists.
And
So I share that with you for your review.
Just to clarify the presentation, so we had pictures of houses that met the current code for the city, and then also images that would met the concept plan criteria as well. And you may have missed it, we had a matrix that lists out the requirements for each, so what the differences between the two were
There's
as
a
well.
limited number of handouts for that. There were not sufficient, there was other problems with the presentation, you know, getting there. I understand it's hard sometimes to find a place. If I was presenting this audience, what they did is had to project it on this wall. So there's some mechanical problems with the presentation. But the fact that it was missing was, here's as it stands, here's the option that you could go to. The verbiage, we had the verbiage of the Park Place plan. We had it written there. We did not have the citywide plan that they were being asked to potentially adopt. And I think that's a complete presentation. They need that in front of them.
So let me ask you a question. We just finished, or in the process of finishing a development in Park Place up around the South Fork Water Board plan, right? Would the houses that are being built there fit under this design standard?
Those are zoned low-density R10, and there's no requirement for alleys in that area, but the standard, design standards for the front of the house meet our current, you know,
What about
citywide
Trailview
rules.
Estates?
Trailview Estates?
There's massing limitation, so no. What happened was during the concept plan, what we heard from the public is a desire to have different types of housing, so not look the same as the rest of the city. So because of that, there are criteria that require different things. And some of those relate to the massing of the building. So a lot of the homes that you would see in typical subdivisions in Oregon City wouldn't work within the Park Place concept plan.
And I reviewed that plan prior to coming here tonight, and the plan does speak about affordable housing, about a range of values of housing affordable to different target markets. The other thing that I find amazing is you're free as a builder to take exception to this plan, and it changes the type of application you have to pursue. So has anybody pursued that? I mean, has the plan as it exists even been put to the test?
No.
No, it's not even, no,
So nobody's even tried it as it stands.
no.
That's correct.
So to return to the alleys. So if I understand this correct, our existing code requires alleys in these specific zones and citywide, and the proposal is just to limit those to the concept plan areas, which currently have an allowance or a requirement for alleys. Correct?
Correct.
Okay.
I'm still confused. How we, beyond a couple of things that you mentioned up by the high school and that,
There's not a lot.
I think one of the fundamental questions for me, I think, is that can you respect the design intent of the concept plan and live with the citywide design standards, which allow garages to be placed on the street? They just regulate the number of design elements on the front of the house. That's what we've been doing for the last 10 years. So, I think what promotes diversity in the concept plan areas is the underlying zoning. The design standards themselves improve the streetscape and how it looks, and do have that impact on the walkability. But we have a compromise in the citywide design standards that, allows for a garage on the street in return for certain design elements such as porches, et cetera, that provide that pedestrian interaction.
So for the concept plans, I'm not overly concerned about. If we leave the concept plans as they are, they're gonna address alleys and we'll come back to the concept plans. But to address what Mayor, you were saying about this whole equitable housing, the equitable housing public advisory team, if I read this paper correctly, says that they actually recommended limiting the alley requirement, which is what's being proposed, in support of the equitable housing.
Limiting it to just
The concept
Yep.
plans.
That's
So they
correct.
thought that removing it from citywide would be a better move for us to support the equitable housing. I don't know how they got to that conclusion, and maybe you can shed a light. The mayor seems to believe that it doesn't support the equitable housing. I don't know how they got there, but that's what this says, is that was their recommendation.
Yeah, a lot of the discussion also regarding alleys, not in concept plan areas, is that we live in a city that's built a lot of the way already. And so fitting in alleys and places on one-off sections can be very difficult. And so a lot of the discussion was sort of right-sizing the code for clean slates of concept plan concept plan areas can start to build out those. We also don't have a whole lot of medium-density residential in which this section applies. You probably don't see a lot of alleys today because of that supply, that there's not a lot of it within the city now. And then also because there's provisions under that section that say, if an alley doesn't make sense, you don't have to build one. And then you explain why it doesn't make sense, and then you don't build one, which is what we've seen in a lot of the newer development, which is why they don't exist.
And they come to the community development director for that decision, do they not?
Everything is through a public process, through a decision, so it depends. But yeah, land divisions and commercial development is through staff.
so we come back to the point of every time we put a regulation on a builder, it costs more money,
Yeah, so we're removing the requirement.
except for.
Except for in the concept
except
plans.
to concept plan areas.
Right. So you're wanting to dive into the concept plan area as far as removing it from concept plan?
Yes.
Well, the question is how we go about that. That was a decision based on public input and a large bunch of it. I recognize some of those will be, very narrowly focused groups. But if we're gonna redo that, it was established under a process, and if it's gonna be modified, it should be modified under a process.
Okay, and I'm not saying it shouldn't be, but I'm also saying that, 2003 is a long way from 2019. And,
I agree.
and many things have changed, whether it's, housing and homelessness or prices or, architectural features. There's been a bunch of stuff that has changed. I mean, back in 2003, we were just at the beginning of this giant housing boom that people were building
That's why
McMansions
we were
everywhere.
building that, yeah.
But the neighborhood also has the right to protect the character of their neighborhood.
Well,
And then, there's a thing in there, Mr. Mayor, that says if you build a 1,200 square foot house or above, you gotta break up the roof line and do something other than building a box. And if that's what that community wants, if that's so cost prohibitive, that a 6x14 porch is the difference between being able to sell a house and not.
And I don't disagree with that. What I'm saying is, I would rather have it be as the least amount of restriction rather than the most amount of restriction. Because then what they were saying is they don't want them all to look the same, but that's exactly what you're gonna get. You're gonna get whole streets that are gonna be just same house.
See, and I don't agree with that statement, because if you look at the plans that are put forward, maybe there's 5 themes, but there's variations on those themes. And the way the thing is set up, at least within these concept plans, is you have a menu of maybe 10 items, and if you make 5 of them, you qualify. You don't have to have all of them.
Right.
You know, I don't disagree with some of the things. I mean, I personally will not buy a house with a detached garage in Rainy, Oregon, and I get that. But this is for those neighborhoods to decide what they want within reason.
So now we're back to the whole concept of public involvement and who gets involved. And the point is that whether you're talking about, you know, Park Place or McLaughlin or Rivercrest or wherever, there's a core group of 10 or 15, maybe as many as 25 people that regularly show up and do that stuff. Those are the people that showed up at these concept plan meetings. But that's less than 0.001% of the entire population of the neighborhood. So we're giving a lot of credence to, you know, 15 or 20 unelected people who have been through one of these processes.
That's the nature of government. I mean, anybody that thinks that government is by the majority as opposed to the vocal minority is sadly misinformed.
Well, and that's why we're sitting here. So that's why I'm gonna have the discussion.
I'll join in it, but I'm not gonna overcome the will of the people in their neighborhoods.
Okay?
So maybe at some point, Ms. Turway, you could, doesn't have to be tonight, inform us of how the neighborhoods or the city could approach revising the concept plans if desired, like what that public process would be, what the expenses on the city, how much time would it take, is there a modified? Because there were some folks at Park Place who were open to changing some of the design standards in there. It was a total mixed bag of opinions in the room, but I don't feel like we're informed enough to know, like, what does it mean? Can we revisit some of these old plans in a modified way? Like, what are the options? What's the resources that it would take, time, you know, because I know these can be lengthy processes, so it would be good if we're all up to speed on that, if that's even a consideration.
Don't answer
Sure.
that tonight.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be tonight.
Well, in other words, could we do a limited review?
Yeah.
Not the entire plan in its entirety. Focus on maybe a certain aspect of the plan.
Moving on.
You're either pregnant or you're not, my friend, now.
And then we need to be more flexible.
Final issue of planning commission concern, and expressed during city commission's review is with respect to street trees. And,
No, it's after.
sorry, this was just raised by the city commission, not the planning commission. So currently, the code for street trees requires 1 street tree be planted every 35 feet of frontage. It doesn't mean on center, that's just how you calculate the overall number. And then there's a street tree list based on the width of the planter strip, and the developer gets to select the species. This code applies for all subdivision and all site plan design review throughout the city. If you remove a street tree, then our code requires that it be replaced, and unless there's a hazard, the number of replacement trees is based on the diameter of the existing tree that was removed. And it's a formula that's been in place for quite some time. With respect to tree removal on development properties, not in the public right-of-way, we also have a table that governs replacement and the number of trees based on the diameter of the tree removed. And so, are there any concerns with respect to this approach that we've had? And any questions about that?
And there is a letter on file by by an individual as part of
Correct.
tonight's
Well-
packet.
Yeah.
And to assure the community, there's letters on file on a number of subjects that have all been read, whether it be food carts, trees, or whatever. They've been read.
Yeah. I think what we're hearing from the development community is that they would like the number of replacement trees in both cases to be reduced. Staff's feeling or position on this is that in the absence of tree preservation language in the code, that having a table with ratios based on diameters of existing trees is the best approach that we can have to encourage the preservation of those trees at the discretion of the owner or the developer, and still allow for efficient redevelopment of land or development of land. It is if you call it a pay-to-play approach, we do allow for fee and lieu payments into the tree mitigation fund if there's insufficient space to plant those mitigation trees on site. That program has worked well. It does, in some cases, mean some fairly hefty payments into the tree mitigation fund. And we use that money to leverage the Friends of Trees program for planting citywide. Any other comments?
No, the only other thing that I would add is, we hope to talk about trees and look at citywide, what are our regulations for trees in general after the comprehensive plan is done. And so, we have lots of sorts of regulations and chapters that regulate trees within the city. And so maybe taking a holistic look at that, or within annexation areas or whatever at one time at a later project, is our recommendation. But
Any question on this?
On the thing in total or this subject?
No, this subject.
No.
Is that it?
That's it. Our schedule for review is listed here. We've seen this. We were planning to ask for final direction on this list of things on April the 3rd, and then April 17th, we would work on getting revised code language to you.
And then, can you go back one?
Sorry?
So let us know, we put the items that were the big topics at planning commission tentatively on this list, and the other items that you had identified on this list as well, if you want us to add more items to this list. So if there anything within this code amendment package you had concerns about and it's not on the list, tell us and we'll add it to the list, and then we'll talk about it more on April 3rd. If it's not on this list, then we assume it's fine within the code package.
I have a general question about language, and I guess I'll direct it to our resident wordsmith and attorney. We've chosen to change the word must to the word shall. Yet the word must, according to this Federal Register drafting handbook, imposes a legal obligation, whereas the word shall is more diluted. Can you comment on why we would do that and what the impact of changing that language is?
Wow, talk about it in the weeds.
I'm talking about when you don't want something to control something, sometimes you purposely leave it vague.
I think the reason why we use the term shall is because shall is forward-looking on what the property owner must do, and because shall is what the traditional land use, there are land use cases that talk about shall being mandatory and may being permissive. There isn't a land use case that I can think of with regard to the term must. I just think in land use planning, we've always used the word shall and may. And those are the cases that I can think of. I don't know if anybody else has any.
No, a lot of those changes came from the planning commission, and some of those members went through the code over and over and sort of suggested those edits, so.
I'm just telling you that in the Federal Register drafting handbook, the word must imposes a legal obligation, and shall may be more subject to
I mean,
interpretation.
I'm not sure that I would use the Federal Register handbook over LUBA cases considering land use for local governments. I mean, I would look at those as kind of different things, but I can appreciate your point.
Enough said.
Anything else?
Yes, Mr. Ray, can you please send this list out to us?
Yes, and we also attach it to every agenda for each agenda item, and then we have it on our website as well, but we'll certainly send it to you. But if the public wants to keep up on what's on the list, it's out there.
And the other thing I would ask is, I assume we're gonna have a presentation on April 3rd to step through all of these things. I think it's really helpful to have the zoning map with the zones highlighted about which ones we're talking about, because a lot of these items, we're switching back and forth between mixed use, 1 and 2, and commercial and campus and all this stuff, and it just, for me personally, a map is really helpful so that you can highlight, which areas are we talking about, for each one of these topics.
Sure.
Yep. All right.
Okay, so we're gonna take a 10-minute break and we'll come back at 5 to 9.
Thank you.
Disperse excerpts from the zoning map. Add in excerpts from the zoning map.
That's killing me.
4.
Done with it.
We have several public comments. Tell those people out there if they want to comment, they need to get in here.
Laura, tell people to comment, if they want to comment, come in.
So first up, we have Jackie Hammond Williams and Tara, I'm gonna say Spray, is that right?
That is right.
Yeah.
Please state your name for the record and a reminder you got 3 minutes.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Jackie Hammond Williams. I live on Holcomb Boulevard, 14422, Oregon City, Park Place neighborhood, 20-year resident of that neighborhood. I was part of the committee that drafted that Park Place concept plan. And I hear now that a small group of developers want to make changes to the adopted design standards. Many people from the neighborhood were appointed. We didn't just show up, we were actually appointed to take part in the designing of this concept plan. We spent many hours over many months in intense and detailed meetings, a long, long time. There were cutting-edge architects and engineers who were brought in by the city, I'm sure at great expense. We had the national award-winning Serra Architects, who are really an amazing company. Their tagline is sustainable development for the built environment, and they guided the vision we all had for the plan. The design standards were seriously debated and thought out very carefully. It's bad enough to have this giant Park Place Village development forced on our neighborhood by the state after 3 failed annexation attempts. But adding insult to injury is that these well-crafted design standards are now under question, which I think was raised by the developers. I hope you'll all study the Park Place concept plan. On page 26 under housing, you'll see it is recommended that additional design standards be instituted in the concept plan. On page 27, you'll read that we want to create a richer and more diverse community, that we want the plan to be community-orientated with the architectural elements that encourage eyes on the street and neighborhood interaction, including multifamily housing clustered around common open spaces instead of parking lots to help foster a sense of community. Vehicle access provided in the rear and with alleys. Page 62, under implementation, we want to create design standards for Park Place in order to ensure diverse, compact, attractive, and community-orientated residential development. We had a vision. We did that, and I hope you'll honor all the work that went into this concept plan and the wishes of the neighborhood and vote to keep these standards. I'd also like to take the opportunity to address the subject of food carts, which came up tonight. I hope this will be a yes vote from the city commissioners to expand food carts throughout the city. Food carts are listed in Mount Hood territory. Are you familiar with that? That's the county's wonderful tourism plan. The food carts are listed in Mount Hood Territory's 2019 travel planner on page 35. They obviously think, they're a good thing for tourism. But of course, there's no mention of Oregon City because they're not allowed.
Ma'am, your time's up, and
Can I finish? I have a...
we've all read your letter. So if you're just reading off the letter you have, we've all got it right in front of you. We've all read it.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and City Commissioners. I'm Tara Spray. I live in Portland. I'm the Dean of Academic Foundations and Connections at Clackamas Community College. Part of my role at the college is serving as the Dean of Students, and I'm here representing the college tonight in support of the proposed development code amendments to allow for more equitable housing. As you may know, Clackamas Community College serves approximately 25,000 individuals in both credit and non-credit opportunities each year. The contributions these students and our college make to our community and local economy cannot be overstated. Clackamas County annually receives roughly $62 million in income due to CCC operations. Thousands of former Clackamas Community College students are employed in our city and our county. Our current students eat, shop, work, and play in Oregon City, but what many of them aren't doing is living here. Housing options are quite limited, and increasing rents have meant that students can't find affordable housing in the community where they go to school. For our students to meet their educational goals, many must apply for financial aid, as 38% of our students are unable to meet expenses to attend college. For federal financial aid purposes, a college determines the cost of attendance that includes tuition and fees, textbooks, and room and board, which is housing. Currently, 45%, almost half of the cost of attendance for Clackamas Community College is dedicated to housing. In fact, as we calculated our cost of attendance for the 2019-20 school year, next year, we significantly increased the housing portion of financial aid from $7,500 to $10,260 due to escalating rent costs in Oregon City. We haven't seen an increase like that in several years. Additionally, 20% of our students come to campus without a car. They turn to public transportation as a viable means of reaching our campus. The farther they have to live from campus, the more expensive it is for them to travel to get here. Even more problematic for many students, the amount of time it takes to travel here means less time working, meeting family obligations, or studying. Increasing the diversity of housing options and a resulting stabilization of housing costs will allow more of our students to live here. To close, I recently heard a story about students who rented a house in Oregon City. To make the rent affordable, they added an additional roommate who lives in the garage, a space without adequate heating. For many reasons, this is not acceptable. Our students need options for housing that are affordable so they can be successful in meeting their educational goals and contribute to our local economy. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John Ginsberg and Dan Burge, or is it Burge?
I'm up.
John, who's John?
Me.
Okay.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is John Ginsberg. I reside in Portland, and I'm Director of Student Life at Clackamas Community College. I would like to speak in favor of allowing permanent mobile food carts to operate on the CCC campus here in Oregon City. Currently, the college dining operation consists of one cafe in our community center. While we're fortunate to have great food service provider, not all institutions do, who consistently receives high scores related to customer satisfaction, they are obviously limited by logistical factors in the variety of food they can provide, hours of day that they operate, and proximity to the many buildings on our campus. Most of the suggestions for improvement the college receives regarding campus dining are about expanding food options and maintaining affordability. I understand that a concern some have with food carts is the perceived competition with existing brick and mortar establishments here in the city. As mentioned previously, 20% of our students come to our campus without their own car. They do not have the means to visit off-campus restaurants. Given their limited break times in between classes, even those establishments that might seem within walking distance are actually too far. This issue of limited time to eat also applies to students who do drive. Further, the affordability factor is huge for CCC students, as you've already heard. Providing mobile food carts with reasonable pricing is an option that is important to our students. As those who have patronized mobile food carts recognize, and as this metropolitan area is known for, these carts represent an incredibly diverse array of food options. The college holds an increasing variety of cultural events throughout the year. Food is frequently, if not always, at the heart of such activities. Food carts would enable a greater celebration of diversity and learning through food from cultures both locally and around the world. Food carts also provide an opportunity for community members to develop a small business with relatively low risk. CCC could provide educational courses to assist these community members with their entrepreneurial ventures. Allowing food carts on our campus would allow for these small businesses to pilot their ideas before expanding to other areas of the community. Finally, for those not affiliated with the college who do have both the means and time, we would invite you to join us on campus to join us over a meal at one of these carts. We value the engagement with our Oregon City neighbors and believe that it would deepen if members of the community came to campus for a bite. This invitation is obviously open right now with our cafe, but I have a feeling that it would be more appealing were the college to have an even wider variety of options to offer with carts.
And the high school. Are you ready for hundreds of kids to come?
We actually, we have a lot of high school students on
I
our
know.
campus anyway,
I know,
taking.
so I'm not meaning to take your time.
No, that's fine. Thank you for your time and consideration, and I will be submitting these also in writing at a later
Okay.
point.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to let you know, I'm not opposed to food carts at the college. I think that's probably the one place that we probably all agree that we could come to some arrangement as far as food carts are concerned.
That's excellent that this is the issue that you can all agree on. That's wonderful. Thank you.
There might be a couple others.
I didn't say we would all agree, I just
It's possible.
Dan?
Oh, wait, Dan Berg, I submitted writing, so I won't go over that, but I'll go over, I'm a property owner and builder in Oregon City, and $44,000 it cost me generally in permit fees, SDC fees to build a house. And I got the land cost, which is anywhere from $100,000 to $200,000. So we're talking $200,000 before we even start building a house. So when we talk about affordable housing, you know, there's a lot of other issues on the plate. Other than that, the trees, issue that everybody wants a lot of trees. I'm for trees, and I think we need a lot of people. I'd pay to plant trees other places. Be told I have to plant so many trees on my property. I'm not for that. But that's all I've got.
All right, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. William Gifford and Denise McGriff.
Thanks, Dan.
After you, sir.
Thank you. Congratulations, Commissioner.
Oh, well, not yet.
My name is William Gifford, and I live in Oregon City, and some comments came across my desk that I need to share with you. This is specifically regarding codes of alleys and alley construction and garages. In both public roads, regarding public roads and alleys, consuming land for alleys was one thing when land was only $10,000 an acre and SDCs does not exist. It does not work at today's prices. Alleys might work with flat grid type subdivisions. How or even why would you incorporate alleys with hills and curvilinear streets? Alleys eliminate functional backyards. Segments of the residential market like taking their kids a couple of blocks away to a common area swing set or play area. Some families like walking out their back door to their own. Not only is it efficient for a busy family, it allows kids to play outside without an adult necessary to take them down the street. Alleys can be a corridor for criminals. Perhaps someone from the police department should be asked to comment on that activity. Alleys produce dark areas, not visible by neighbors, nor even by residents of the homes. If the city is proposing all parking be off alleys, think of how a young mom with young kids, younger driving age girls, etc., would feel about security while driving down an alley void of people. If the city is proposing parking off alleys, think of all the neighborhood connectivity and socializing that is lost during the warm months. Neighbors cleaning their cars do so in their driveways. Visibility and connectivity create communication that does not happen in an alley. From another citizen, if approved, alley load development will drive up developmental costs, lot costs, and the end product costs for the consumer. This greatly conflicts with the objectives set forth in the equitable housing push. Create more impervious hardscaped areas that will greatly impact how we deal with the already extremely challenging storm design requirements. Create less yards and diminish green areas. Create constrained alley access with no sidewalks or safe pedestrian travel connections. Increase city costs affiliated with having to maintain twice as many streets once the public improvements are turned over to the city. I understand there's a proposal that the property owners would have to maintain their own alleyways. There is another code enforcement nightmare. Diminish rear yards after driveways are placed, which will leave very little usable rear yard for the property owners, no privacy, and very little usable area for homeowners to utilize. Be problematic, if possible at all, for any sites with topographic constraints. A sloping project will not be compatible with alley road construction. Create less desirable developments as well as finished homes. Alley load product is not sought after by the public. This would force builders and developers to construct an inferior product that will cost future homeowners more to purchase. That were their comments, and I just have to say I am concerned about the additional costs because of some of these regulations.
Okay?
I have a question. Mr. Gifford, you said you read that on behalf, that came across your desk, so the source is from someone else? You're
Yes.
reading that on behalf of someone else? Is that an individual or a group of individuals or one person?
It was, these two particular ones came from two different individuals that didn't choose to make public their comments, but they were strongly considered. And I chose these as representative of some of the comments that I've heard from other citizens as well.
Understood. I wanted to know the source of them. They have chosen to remain anonymous. Okay.
I think, Ms. Griff?
I'm sorry. I'm gonna say almost the exact opposite.
Oh, okay. Go for it.
Anyway, Denise McGriff, and I live in Oregon City in the McLaughlin district, which has lots of alleys and detached garages. What I wanted to just briefly say was one of the things that we talked about at Planning Commission with regard to affordable housing and equitable housing, that without incentives, it is going to be extremely difficult for us to achieve these goals. We, as planning commissioners, supported all of this. We support the equitable housing, but if we keep getting the same products that we're getting today, because there aren't a lot of options, it's not gonna be affordable. So that was something that was not part of this process, but we had a lot of discussion about what we could possibly do and working with Metro or other cities to combine to create some sort of a fund, or we didn't come up with the solution, but we just said, without the financial wherewithal to get this type of housing, we're not gonna get anything new. The other thing I wanted to add very briefly was, I also was a member of the South End Concept Plan as representing the Planning Commission. And we had a lot of participation from the South End area, even people who are just on the edge of the urban growth boundary and who would be affected by this. And I will say that we had quite a few people come in to talk to us about what they'd like to see. Now, that area isn't constrained too much by slopes, but it is constrained by wetlands and other water bodies. So what their idea is that we would look at trying to develop in a different way from what we have right now, which is basically your grid system. I think from my standpoint, and I understand what the development community is talking about, because they have a certain program and a profile that they build, that's what they build. Again, what if we went and sought out developers who maybe think a little bit differently, who might be considering alleys or might be considering putting garages in the back, not are detached, but are attached? That can be done. There is a way to develop property that is not the same product that we are getting today in Oregon City, which is the typical, well, you know what it is. Some of us live in them. That's what we're getting. And so when we hear the comment that people aren't gonna buy it, what I'm concerned about is that's the only thing they're offered. What if people were offered something else? We don't know whether they'll buy it, but there are other developers out there, people who do development of housing that think about it in a different way than the grid system. So that's all I'm saying, is that that needs to be considered, and that's what we talked about in the South End concept. We wanted to see something different than what we are being offered today. So that's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Leah Tucker and Tom Guile.
Apologize, Mayor and Commissioners, but after hearing some of the testimony tonight, I think I'm going to withdraw my card because it's in my best interest and your best interest.
All right.
Keep my mouth shut.
Thank you. Tucker.
Gracious. Hi, thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. I hope you'll excuse me for my style tonight. I was told fairly late, and I was actually at a local school discussing mobile food units. My name is Leah Tucker. I'm the Executive Director of the Oregon Mobile Food Association. We're a fairly new grassroots nonprofit, and I represent and speak for the mobile food industry here in Oregon. So this is very much near and dear to my heart, and I've heard a lot about Oregon City, but I did not know this meeting was coming up. I wanted to, express my gratitude to you all for at least starting the conversation and working towards opening up Oregon City. I know there's been a lot of community discussion and hope for mobile food units in Oregon City. You're very near to the downtown Portland area, near enough that food carts look at Oregon City and think, there's some possibility out there if we could get there. Sorry, I had nothing prepared for this evening.
You're fine, go ahead.
I also wanted to offer up my assistance in moving forward. The city obviously has done some research. I think that there's some missing information and some pieces of information that maybe tie into state guidelines and regulations that may inhibit some of the planning that you are currently doing. And listening to some of what's already being talked about and some of the proposals that are being put forward, it sounds like there may be some conflicts going forward with state regulations and state definitions and how things function at the kind of state level and what they expect from counties and cities moving forward with any mobile food plans. So I'd offer my time and commitment to seeing Oregon City implement a plan that works both for the city and for the industry and for the state as a whole.
Okay.
So that's what I've got.
Thank you.
Really.
Why don't you make sure you trade information with Laura after the
Yeah,
meeting?
absolutely. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mike Mitchell.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Mike Mitchell, and I live in Oregon City. At the risk of repeating myself, something I said before the Planning Commission several months ago and before this body once before, there are 3 topics here that I would strongly encourage you to take them out of what you're doing now and kick them back to the Planning Commission, those being tree protections, shelters, and food carts. And my reasoning for that, even though the public process that went into these code revisions was wonderful, there was a tremendous amount of public involvement, it was always couched in terms of this is equitable housing. And I think there are a lot of individuals and groups in the community that would like to weigh in on those 3 topics that didn't know they were going to be a part of this package. That's point number 1. In case you don't do that, I have to make a comment on a couple of them. I have a serious concern on the 10-bed number for the shelters. If that's allowed across all residential zones and you start moving from a less dense residential zone down into a higher density zone, the impact on the neighbors of a 10-bed facility in a lower density residential zone is going to be huge. I mean, how do those people get outside, whether to have a smoke or talk privately or whatever? They're going to be in the neighbors' yards. I don't think a 10 number can make sense across all the different zoning limitations, zoning sizes. So I hope you'll consider that. The tree protection, Mr. Guile and I have had several conversations on this, and I can't get past unintended consequences. When you think about the development process, the amount of time it takes to acquire the land, to put in the infrastructure, to get the permits, to build the housing, even 3 years is a blink of time. And to the mayor's point, if I acquired land and I was a developer, which I'm not, first thing I'd do is cut the trees down. Unintended consequences is what I'm worried about. The final thing on the 2 concept plans. Plans have to be flexible. Times change, circumstances change, our goals change. Over the years, business plans that I've written never ended up getting implemented exactly the way they were originally planned. However, I don't think you can remove items that go to the essence of a plan and still have a plan. And to me, when you look at these plans, these are intended to be areas that are more pedestrian friendly and less garage centric than what we allow in the rest of the city. And hopefully we can find a way to revisit that, because I don't think they're written all that well. Small example. I love the idea of a front porch, but the requirement says it has to be 24 inches off the ground. If you're talking about a person who
Mike,
has a mobility,
you're out of time too.
24-foot long ramp or a lift.
Thank you.
We don't want to make houses less accessible.
Wouldn't be the first one.
We know. Oh, no.
Okay, so I would entertain a motion to continue this to the March 20th meeting.
So moved.
Seconded.
For discussion, call roll, please.
Sorry.
We went fast. I know.
Okay. Commissioner Lyle Smith,
Yes.
Commissioner Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell,
Aye.
Mayor Holliday.
Aye. Okay, moving on. General business 19-162, first reading of ordinance number 19-1002, false alarm reduction and permit program. Chief Band?
Good evening, Mayor and Commission. This program, what spurred this program had to do with a bunch of changes in law enforcement across Clackamas County, and that was us changing several years ago to paperless police reporting. We also had a dispatch software change, and in a nutshell, the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office stopped this certain record system that they had, and that was a system that we used for our own staff to run the alarm program. What this essentially does is allows us to utilize a vendor to do what we used to do. And I think the vendor's gonna do a lot more thorough job than what our record staff did. So our police record staff did their job, and then they would grab and go through these logs and send out notices and deal with false alarms. The reason there's a lot of language here. The reason it's kind of important to have a fairly robust system is to try and make alarms legitimate. Because if you don't find people, if you don't have a system, then people are calling 911, they're having a vendor call 911 to us, and police officers are responding, and over time, if we're not holding them accountable for false alarms, then ultimately the system is useless, because the vast majority of the alarms that we go to are false alarms. So this vendor will be doing all of the administrative function, that's what this allows, of making sure people have permits, sending them out notices for false alarms, having people pay fines for that and not being registered. But anybody who has an appeal, or if you see the term alarm, the administrator of the program is still one of our staff people. So any of that kind of stuff still run by the city. This is mostly just having somebody do the administrative function. And the only other kind of major change is they're going to be doing a lot better job collecting those fines. We just didn't really have the staff time to do it very well, so we really didn't. So if you have any questions, let me know, but it's kind of simple.
Anybody?
No questions.
I just had one question. Sorry. My only concern in reading this was the whole ability to suspend someone's registration. I mean, I understand that false alarms are an issue, but to say that the police are no longer going to show up, I don't know. I was kind of surprised by that strong language, but.
Can I answer that?
Sure.
Because I come from the industry. In fact, I had a company for 5 years that installed residential alarm systems. And what you find is that there are a class of homeowners that will not do the maintenance or repairs to take care of a problem. So a common false alarm issue is a spider in a motion detector. Okay? And so you turn on your system, and at 2 o'clock in the morning, the spider decides to get up and have a snack and sets off the alarm. That dials central station. They call the police come. And if you don't fix that, it happens time and time and time again. And at some point, we have to have a mechanism to say, listen, if you aren't going, you've paid your fines and we still have a false alarm problem, we have to have a way to say, okay, you're done. We're just not going to answer your call anymore. And there is a 1 or 2% of those alarm system owners that do that kind of thing.
I agree with the program. Coming from a former law enforcement background, having had to deal with chronic alarms, representing the danger they represent to responders, and they have you going on a false alarm where your services might be needed elsewhere, people need to be accountable for the quality of their system. That's what this is designed to do. I'm fine with it.
It is, to your question, it is, I'm not aware of us suspending. It's one of those, there's a lot of things that we have that we just have it there, so we can threaten it. And say, look, we're gonna suspend your life, you know. Generally, the multiple fines are what will get people there before. And we've actually had some commercial people pretty bad at this too.
Oh, yes.
But it is very rare that has ever even happened.
And other major cities are dealing with the same issue right as we speak.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there are several cities in the county that are going to the same vendor. The county's going to a different vendor. It's kind of a move a lot of people are making.
Is there a motion?
Move to approve 19-162, first reading of ordinance number 19-1002, false alarm reduction and permit program.
Second.
Moved and second for discussion. Call a roll, please.
Just a minute,
Oh, first reading. I'm sorry, Ms. Richter.
excuse me. Ordinance number 19-1002, an ordinance of the City of Oregon City repealing and replacing Title V, Business License and Regulations, Chapter 5.08, Alarm Systems of the Oregon City Municipal Code, 2001.
Call roll, please.
Commissioner Lyle Smith,
Yay.
Commissioner Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell,
Aye.
Mayor Holliday.
Aye. So moving on to, let's see if we can do these expeditiously, please. So 19-164, second reading of ordinance number 19-1003, designating Mountain View Cemetery as a park under Oregon City Charter, Chapter 10.
Move to approve 19-164, second reading of ordinance number 19-1003.
Ordinance number 19.
Is there a
Oh,
second?
sorry.
Seconded.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Ms. Richter.
Ordinance number 19-1003, an ordinance of the City of Oregon City updating the property description of the Mountain View Cemetery previously designated as a park under Oregon City Charter, Chapter 10.
Call roll.
Commissioner Lyle Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell,
Aye.
Mayor Holliday.
Aye. 19-165, second reading of ordinance number 19-1005, designating Oak Tree Park as a park under Oregon City Charter, Chapter 10.
Move to approve ordinance 19-165, second reading ordinance 19-1005, designating Oak Tree Park as a park under Oregon City Charter, Chapter 10.
Second.
Ms. Richter.
Ordinance number 19-1005, an ordinance of the City of Oregon City designating the property identified as Oak Tree Park as a park under Oregon City Charter, Chapter 10.
Call roll.
Commissioner Lyle Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell,
Aye.
Mayor Holliday.
Aye. 19-166, second reading of ordinance number 19-1006, designating Singer Creek Park as a park under Oregon City Charter, Chapter 10.
Move to approve 19-167, second reading of ordinance number 19-1007,
Six.
designating park, what?
We're on 6.
Six.
1006.
70.
That's, designate, 1006, designating Singer Creek Park as a park.
Second.
Ms. Richter.
Ordinance number 19-1006, an ordinance of the City of Oregon City designating the property known as Singer Creek Park as a park under Oregon City Charter, Chapter 10.
Call the roll.
Commissioner Lyle Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell,
Aye.
Mayor Holliday.
Aye. 19-167, second reading of ordinance number 19-1007, designating Barkley Hills Park as a park under the Oregon City Charter, Chapter 10.
Move to approve 19-167, second reading of ordinance number 19-1007, designating Barkley Hills Park as a park under Oregon City Charter, Chapter 10.
Second.
Moved and seconded, Ms. Richter.
Ordinance number 19-1007, an ordinance of the City of Oregon City designating the property known as Barkley Hills Park as a park under Oregon City Charter, Chapter 10.
Call the roll.
Commissioner Lyle Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell,
Aye.
Mayor Holliday.
Aye. Anybody want to pull anything from the consent agenda?
No.
Is there a motion?
I'd like just a brief discussion on the contract with BPA. I'd like to hear from John. It's just a simple question. He'll probably tell me this is how it's done. So, should I pose my question?
Go ahead.
It's a reimbursement contract to the tune of $380,000, a lump sum advance payment at the time the contract is initiated, not at the time the work begins. It is open to additional funds if required by BPA. the completion date is 18 months from the date the contract would be issued. Is that typical in the industry? Because if I were to build a house and somebody said your house is 380,000, I would not give them 380,000 up front. I'd do it incrementally, what they could traditionally call a, incremental. Is that, do we have no negotiating ability whatsoever?
I would say we've been negotiating with BPA now just to get the work done. And I do think it's an industry standard. We don't have another example to compare it to in Oregon City. But we've been working with their staff to get to this place, get to a place where if you remember, you might, because you were on the commission when we approved a $50,000 contract to get them to do the kind of the feasibility analysis and come to terms with what the work needed to happen, whether it could happen. And so they've completed that work. We've been in communication with them over the kind of work that they need to do and the schedule that they need to do it in. And so, yeah, it was, it does feel like a tough pill to swallow.
It is.
You know, BPA, like, you know, other major industry folks that we have to deal with, or maybe not industry, agency folks that we have to deal with. Union Pacific, for instance, sometimes they hold a pretty big stick unless they're wanting to do the work versus us wanting to do the work. So, you know, I think I feel comfortable with the fact that we've got BPA and they've got good staff. I think that their mode here is to kind of under promise and over deliver, but you're right, the agreement has provisions for if they, you know, need more funding for what they need to do, they can ask.
And I get that, John. The thing that sticks in my craw is like a construction perm loan. You know, first of all, this starts the moment this document is signed and delivered. It doesn't start at the time construction begins. And for 20 months or 18 months, I give them $380,000, which they may not even start work for half of that period. So that's just my only comment. If that's the industry standard, I've made my comment. I accept your explanation at face value. I don't like it, but I accept it.
Okay. And my only comment to that is, you know, people used to say you can't fight City Hall, but you especially can't fight the federal government or the trains.
Well, I worked for BPA for a while, I understand.
Okay, so now, is there a motion for the consent agenda?
Move to approve.
Second.
Call roll, please.
Commissioner Lousmith,
Aye.
Commissioner Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Aye.
Mayor Holliday.
Aye. Mr. Manager, unless there's something critical given the late hour and our executive session, do you have anything?
I forgot about it.
No, I do not. Thanks.
Okay. Anybody here before we go to exec session? Then we're adjourned.